risks would you take for your partner? I mean it. If you knew that it might end up with you facing a horrible death, would you? And what about the children? If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen. And please, if you enjoy the video, then like it, share it, and watch the next one. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. Who's your favourite Scottish hero? We're programmed to expect Scotland's heroes to be men, but this tale is about a woman, and she's not even Scottish. The question is, would you have the nerve and determination to go through what she did? Of course, she wasn't always the bravest woman in Scottish history. So who was she? Slender, pretty, with fair skin and brown eyes, Winifred was the daughter of William Herbert, 1st Marquess of Powys. She'd grown up first in Powys Castle and then with her Aunt Anne and her husband Viscount Carrington before a brief spell at Saint-Germain-en-Laye outside Paris. Now a mum, with her teenage son studying in France and her 5-year-old daughter at home, she and her husband, the Earl of Nithsdale, lived in Terregles Castle in Kirkcudbrightshire. But they'd often be in this neck of the woods to visit their friends, the Earl's sister Mary and her husband Charles, also an Earl of Traquair. They were nobility. And whilst Winifred was always short of cash because her husband's spending, life would have been comfortable compared to lots of the population. Until it wasn't. The most notable event of 20th October 1714 was a coronation that meant the Hanoverian Elector George sat on the British throne. Just less than a year later, on September the 6th, 1715, John Erskine, Earl of Mar, raised the Jacobite standard at Bravest. Did I mention that Winifred's time in Saint-Germain-en-Laye was with her parents at the Jacobite court in exile? In 1689, as a 16-year-old, the man who was now Winifred's husband had been called up as a captain in the Jacobite cause. And the Stuarts of Traquair, who were family, well, they were Jacobites too. I mean, Catholics. Raving Jacobites. The two couples were stained by that blot on the copybook of comfortable 18th century British political life. It's why Winifred's husband, Lord Nithsdale, had been arrested 12 years earlier and taken to the Tower of London. Just in case. Alone in the house, Winifred had woken up in the night to the sound of 100 sword-wielding, musket-toting vigilantes led by 4 local ministers. When they broke into the smithy, they added hammers and tools to the destructive bag of tricks and smashed their way into the house, searching for anything popish. Whilst they left in empty-handed frustration, they also left the house in turmoil. But they left Winifred Maxwell strengthened, tempered like steel in the flames. 12 years later, when the Jacobite standard raised, there was only one side she could take. William Maxwell, 5th Earl of Nithsdale, rose up and rode off as Winifred watched him fade into the distance. The little lady waiting at home didn't see when her husband raised King James's standard at the Market Cross in Muffet. She didn't see when the people armed themselves against him in Dumfries. She didn't see him take the 4-day ride south to Rotherby to meet up with English Jacobites, or when they arrived cold and wet back north to meet up with Highlanders in Kelso. She didn't see as that Anglo-Scottish force marched west along the line of the border with Highlanders refusing to cross, or when they were finally persuaded to head south to Preston. What she did see was the letter that arrived to turn her world upside down once more. The letter was from her husband, captured at the siege of Preston, taken with the other rebellious nobility to London under close guard, paraded through the streets for maximum humiliation, and now awaiting trial. This was as bad as it gets. Winifred's steel-strengthened spine straightened as her standard unfurled. She rode here to Trachea. Her brother and sister-in-law gave her as much money as they could, knowing that in the Tower, her man's captivity would be self-funded. She would have accommodation to rent, lawyers to hire, bribes to pay. She left her 5-year-old daughter here, and along with her companion Cecilia Evans, got ready to head off through one of the worst winters on record. Now, the troops swarming Dumfries and Carlisle meant that they had to be avoided. These two women would go by horseback on back roads and country trails, trying to blend inconspicuously into the white winter scene until they found small inns to spend the night. It wasn't a journey for ladies. But when they got to Newcastle, they'd take the London coach. Meanwhile, the advantage of the brutal weather was that prying eyes were indoors, firmly fixed on their fireside. The downside was that frozen road went on for 5 days. At the end of that road, they discovered that the Newcastle to London coach was full. What did they do? They couldn't ride further, but it would be days until the next coach. Could they afford to wait? Time wasn't just money, it was life itself. They had to ride to York. But they weren't alone. A gentleman was in the same icy boat and he offered to help them. You see, he had to go on horseback as well, but he knew that he would be quicker. He promised that when he got to York, he would keep them any places that were left in the coach. If done, he'd hire fresh horses. When they eventually got to York, they found that man had booked them the last seat. But there was only one. Someone would have to continue by horse. That's how they set off from York into a blizzard. Snow was drifting, and there were regular stops where both coachmen and passengers had to dig the wheels out. 2.5 days they travelled like this. Progress was slow until just north of Grantham, where it stopped. Stuck in a drift, the coach completely stopped. There was no option but for the passengers to abandon their journey and take refuge in the nearest inn, which they all did. Apart from two, Winifred and Evans. Frantic to get to the Tower and her waiting husband, Winifred insisted on hiring 2 fresh horses, and these women rode into the blizzard once more. Later, Winifred wrote, "If I had known what I was to have gone through, I should have doubted whether I was able to have done it." But she wasn't about to rest. She booked in with an old friend and then bribed her way into the Tower to see her husband in solitary confinement. He had already been impeached for high treason. Sentence was due on the 9th of February. Now, at this point, I should say that if you want to hear more stories about Jacobites in the places that they happened, then you should come on my Everything You Wanted to Know About Jacobites tour in April. Over 7 days, I'll take you to key locations and explain the whole Jacobite period. You'll stay in 4- and 5-star hotels with full board and me as your guide, including a visit to Culloden on the 380th anniversary of the battle at exactly the time the guns started. To come on my incredible Jacobite tour of Scotland, just click the link top right or in the description below for details. Or, if in doubt, email alexis@scotlandhistorytours.co.uk. The sentence is a part of the story that was inevitable. And now, my lords, nothing remains but that I pronounce upon you that terrible sentence of the law, which must be the same that is usually given to the meanest offender in the like kind. The most ignominious and painful parts of it are usually remitted by the grace of the crown to persons of your quality. You, James, Earl of Derwentwater, William, Lord Widdrington, William, Earl of Nithsdale, Robert, Earl of Carnworth, William, Viscount Kenmure, and William, Lord Nairn, return from whence you come. There you must be hanged by the neck, but not until you be dead, for you must be cut down alive, and then your bowels must be taken out and burnt before your faces. Then your heads must be severed from your bodies, divided each into 4 quarters, and these must be at the disposal of the king. And God Almighty be merciful to your souls. The only chance now was a reprieve from the king. But George, knowing that the custom of his newly acquired kingdom meant that subjects had the right to present him with a petition, wanted to make sure that no one did. He let it be known that anyone who might should be kept away. But he was holding an evening reception, and etiquette meant that he couldn't bar entry to people of rank normally accepted at court. So Winifred waited in a room that she knew the king had to pass through. And when the door to his rooms opened, and the thick-set man came out, strolling in idle conversation with some other gentleman of his own German tongue, Winifred fell to her knees in front of him, holding out her petition. But he blanked her and walked straight ahead as if she were invisible. She knew that her only chance was to get him to take the paper. So she caught hold of the hem of his coat and tried to squeeze the rolled up paper into his pocket. But he didn't break step. And she was dragged along the floor, clinging on until one of his courtiers grabbed her waist and pulled the king's coat from her hand. The sad petition dropped to the floor. Later, it was picked up by one of the courtiers. 2 things changed that night. George I knew who Winifred Maxwell was, certain that he'd never forgive the humiliation of her exposing his heartless breach of custom and protocol. And Winifred knew that she wasn't going to save her husband by begging. There and then she decided. The banner she unfurled when she left here must now rally the troops. She pretended to go through the formalities of what she knew would be a fruitless petition to the House of Lords. But Winifred was already putting a real plan into action. She went to the Tower with a joyful countenance, gave the guards a few coins to drink everybody's health. A reprieve was on its way, she said. Then she went in to her husband to tell him that things were really bad, but she had it all under control. When Winifred left, he started to write his last letter to Charles and Mary Traquair here, thanking them for what had been, and a scaffold speech anticipating what was to come. But Winifred wasn't so despondent. She asked her friends, Mr. and Mrs. Mills, to invite another friend, Mrs. Morgan, the next day. She explained that by putting the guards at ease with talk of reprieve, she'd gained permission to take a couple of female visitors, one at a time, to offer what might yet be a last farewell. They would be those visitors, whilst Mr. Mills waited in a carriage outside. She explained the plan. On the eve of execution, the small group arrived at the Tower. First of all, Winnie led Mrs. Morgan up to William's room. Tall and thin, Morgan was wearing an extra petticoat and cloak under her own, which wouldn't show. Once in William's chamber, she took off the extra clothes, and as she did this, Winifred told her husband to do as he was told, and everything would be all right. After an appropriate time had passed for a few last words, Mrs. Morgan headed back down. Now it was Mrs. Mills's turn. With Winifred's arm around her shoulder, she staggered in, sobbing uncontrollably, her face buried in a handkerchief. Inside, her face came out of her handkerchief and her cloak and petticoat came off. She put on the clothes left by Mrs. Morgan earlier as Winifred did her best to paste her husband's face like a pantomime Dane. She then told him to put on Mrs. Mills's cloak and petticoat and wait for her return. When Mrs. Mills stepped out, she did so with her face exposed, dressed in her new clothes, the ones left by Mrs. Morgan. Mrs. Mills looked like a new woman, as she was meant to. So, 2 women out and a man inside. That man, now dressed as a woman, realised that Winifred's plan was halfway through. He submissively followed his wife's instructions, and as she touched up the rouge in his cheeks, dusk was coming. A servant could come in with the candles at any time. She pulled the grey hood of the cloak well down over his head and told him to be careful to keep Mrs. Mills's handkerchief over his face, just as Mrs. Mills had done on the way in. It was showtime. Now, I know what you're thinking. Surely the guards can count. 2 things I should point out here. Firstly, Mrs. Mills was pregnant. So when William Maxwell, Earl of Nithsdale, came out in her clothes, his bulk would be less suspicious. Secondly, by this time, word had got back that the reprieve hadn't come, and Winifred was making a great display of agitation, wanting the visits over so that she could head to court to make one last appeal. Holding her companion firmly by the arm, she kept her body between him and the guards. Still in a state of agitation, she comforted her sobbing friend. All the distraction meant that when this slightly bulky woman left, sobbing in the handkerchief that covered her face, yes, we remember this woman. Nobody batted an eyelid. With the package delivered to the waiting coach, now was the most dangerous and nerve-wracking bit of all. Winifred now had to go back upstairs and ask to be left in her husband's room. Once she was inside, she chatted as if he were still there. "Oh, my darling, this is a terrible state of affairs." "Yes, my love, it's all gone a bit Pete Tong." She could do all the voices. When she thought that she'd done enough of that to seem convincing and for the real Earl to be in a safe place, she bade the imaginary one good night. She told the guards that he was praying and not to disturb him unless called. She hurried down the stairs, got into one of the hackney coaches and asked to be taken to Duke Street. Our friends were waiting in a state of shock, finally realising what they'd just done. Mr. Mills had been so sure that their plan would fail that he hadn't even bothered to find a house for their little hide-in. Thankfully, Celia Evans, who'd been at Winifred's side all the way through the snow and the journey south, took him to a friend's house nearby, which happened to be just by the court of guards. Talk about under their noses. After sorting out a few loose ends, Winifred joined them there. They got into bed and lay motionless in case they should make a sound. When George I heard the news, he went mental. The next day, 2 Jacobite lords, accomplices of William Maxwell's, were led out in turn to the scaffold, draped in black and erected in Tower Hill. They mounted the steps. They looked down at the block surrounded by sawdust. They looked up at the sky one last time, then at the executioner waiting for them. They must have wished that they had married Winifred Maxwell. Later that day, Mrs. Mills brought a loaf of bread and some wine to the Nithsdale's room. She recounted the executions and told them that there was now a price on Lord Nithsdale's head. But at least it was still on his shoulders. But now they had to get out of the country. It turns out that Mr. Mills had a servant who worked at the Venetian embassy. And a few days later, when a coach left that embassy heading for Dover to meet the ambassador's brother, one of the footmen travelling in the coach in smart Venetian livery was none other than the 5th Earl of Nithsdale. Little did the ship's captain know that when he sailed out of Dover, he would be carrying a fugitive. What about Winifred? Why wasn't she on that ship? Well, she had a daughter here at Traquair House and her own affairs to sort out back at Terrigal's castle before she could leave the country. She was about to embark on a new adventure with an unfurled banner fluttering mightily in the breeze as she rode off to face the next challenge. But that's a story for another time. Now, if you've heard a story about Jacobite escape and execution south of the border, you're probably wondering how many executions and escapes there were during the same uprising north of the border. And the good news is that I've made a video about that too, and it's coming up on screen now. If you've enjoyed this one, then like it, share it, and watch the next one. Support the channel by clicking top right to become a Patreon member or buy me a coffee in the description below. In the meantime, Hammy and Dawkins can be Lam Ally. Sherry and Rasta.